I used to teach at a lovely little school in a lush and leafy corner of West London. This was an interesting establishment, as unlike most inner-city London institutions, this school had space. It had multiple playgrounds, a greenhouse, a garden, a pond, and lots of established trees shading grassy patches. It was delightful. The schoolhouse itself was a typical 1970s beige and brown brick and concrete building, light and airy with large windows, wide corridors, and roomy classrooms. Dated, but well-designed. The school is in a shape of a U, one flat entrance point with two long hallways going back to the left and right. These hallways are long and straight. Think of The Shining, Schoolhouse Edition. When teaching summer school, I was always the first person on campus in the morning and the last to leave in the afternoon. I hated closing up the school. I would go down the long corridors, turning off the lights and closing exterior doors, only to get to the end of the hall and see light spilling from a classroom. I would hear hand dryers in the boys' bathroom go off. But when I checked to make sure there were no children left behind, I would find a dark and empty restroom. After securing the building, I would go to turn the security alarm on, only to catch sight of an open door or a hallway light still lit. I honestly thought I was going mad, so I began to make another teacher accompany me to check my work. Yet still, the strange activity persisted. One day, I opened up the school only to have the gardener inform me that the side playground door had been open all night. But we hadn't even used that door or been in that part of the building. It was all very odd. One morning, one of the staff members reported that while using the ladies' restroom, she heard someone come in, rustle papers, and walk around. Yet, when she came out of the stall, no one was there, and she never heard them leave. It was an odd incident, but it wasn't an isolated one. Soon, other female members of staff reported the same experience. By this point, I was convinced there was something going on in this school. One morning, the caretaker and I were chatting over a cup of coffee, and I said to him, "This place isn't right. I think it might be haunted." And without skipping a beat, he looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Oh no, this place is definitely haunted." I told him of my frustration when I was locking up, how the doors would open after being locked, how the lights would switch back on, how the dryer in the boys' bathroom consistently turned on by itself, and how other women had heard someone come into the restroom with them. The caretaker looked me straight in the eyes and smiled. Did they say the person in the bathroom was rattling papers? How did he know that? He smiled at me knowingly, took a long sip of coffee, and sat down at the staff room table. He told me that he constantly got reports from staff about issues with the building that he and other professionals just couldn't fix. He had heard endless reports from frightened staff members who, while using the restroom, were startled by hearing a woman walk in, shuffle papers, and never leave. Most of the time, they thought it was a fellow member of staff, so they would call hello from their stall, only to be left chatting to themselves. Others reported their glasses would go missing. I was advised to never leave my glasses unattended, as once they were gone, they never rematerialized. And more than once, he had watched locked doors open by themselves on CCTV. But this all paled in comparison to an event that occurred one summer's night. The caretaker's home is located on the corner of campus. He's tucked away, but close at all times. One evening in the dead of night, he awoke to the school security alarm's high-pitched scream. Quickly, he bolted out of bed, in nothing but his t-shirt and boxers. He darted to the main building and first checked the perimeter. All the doors and windows were locked and secured. Hastily, he unlocked the main door and attempted to silence the alarm. This is in the middle of London, remember, and the houses across the street began to light up as neighbors pulled back their curtains in curiosity. As the alarm disabled, the caretaker breathed a sigh of relief. False alarm, literally. However, as he stood there in the front lobby, he could hear the sound of boisterous children, laughing, playing, bouncing balls, moving desks, jumping off chairs. Dread and cold filled his body. As he looked down the long, endless corridor, he had some decisions to make. Call the police? Call his wife for backup? Or just break up the fun himself? It was only kids, after all. How dangerous could it be? Stealthily, he grabbed a flashlight from behind the reception desk and pilfered a cricket bat from the sports closet as he headed down the hall. As he slowly approached the last classroom on the right-hand side, he could hear the activity ramping up. The children were positively gleeful as they crashed and smashed around the room. However, as he continued down the corridor, the caretaker had a horrible realization. If all the doors and windows were locked, how did these children get in? With the cricket bat at the ready, he jumped into the room, prepared to startle and scold the midnight bandits. Yet as he stood there, he gazed upon an empty room. There were no children, no balls, no chairs, and no desks. As this was a music room, it was an empty space with instruments along the walls. But he had clearly heard children playing in a fully furnished room. As I sat there, listening to this tale with my coffee clasped between my hands and my mouth agape, I asked the caretaker what this property was prior to the school being built. With a wry smile, he said that this was once the site of a polo pitch. However, after a perfectly planned dramatic sip of coffee, he lowered his voice and said, and prior to that, it was a plague pit. You see, when the bubonic plague hit the shores of England in 1348, it decimated the population. Historian of the time, Robert Avesbury, reported, "Those marked for death were scarce permitted to live longer than 3 or 4 days. It showed favor to no one except a very few of the wealthy. On the same day, 20, 40, or 60 bodies, and on many occasions, many more, might be committed to burial together in the same pit." This darling little school, situated on an attractive patch of land, sits above a mass grave. The caretaker likes to believe that the spirits of children fill the school, playing pranks, being naughty, and doing something that was in short supply in the 1300s, having fun. And as sweet and as idyllic as that may sound, I can tell you from experience, when you are alone in that school, I assure you, you never feel completely at peace. Something you don't know about me is I am really into etymology, the study of the origin of words. I don't just like to look up definitions, but rather dive into the word's history, the purpose, and its necessity. A word that is gathering more and more meaning for me recently is patron. A patron is a person who supports the things they love with endorsements, encouragement, and money. Historically, patrons of the arts would be wealthy or influential people who aided artists in their craft by bestowing them with the materials or financial backing they needed to create their works. Every time that you turn on the West London Witch, you're being a patron. Every time you share a social media post about the podcast or tell a friend about us, you're being a patron. Every time you like, comment, or subscribe to our YouTube channel, that is an act of a patron. That support, love, and endorsement does wonders for our show and continues to grow our audience. However, if you really like the work that Danny and I do and think it's worth a couple of bucks, I would be honored for you to join us on our Patreon page. Every dime that comes into our Patreon goes directly back into the show that you are listening to today. It doesn't have to be much. For as little as $1, £1, €1 a month, you can not only unlock our entire Patreon catalog, but you can also feel good about supporting two creatives who are passionate about sharing their craft with the world. If this sounds like something you'd like or are able to do, head on over to patreon.com/The West London Witch and come and join us in our little coven. Hello and welcome to episode 72 of The West London Witch, a podcast where we share stories about those moments where we find ourselves very much not alone. Today, we will be journeying into the second installment of Tales from the West London Witch Crypt. Stories that I have saved in the depths of my hard drive because, although they're too short for an entire solo episode, they're just too good to keep hidden away. If you are new to the West London Witch, it's important to note that we are a long-form narrative podcast. Each episode revolves primarily around one story, place, or storyteller. Over the years, I have collected tons of fantastic short stories that don't quite fit into our structure. But some of these mini-stories are actually my favorite. So I am delighted to present them to you here in an anthology style. These tales are from storytellers all over the world and are not connected in any way. But they do have one thing in common. They are all chilling, hair-raising, and will leave you wondering, what would I have done in this situation? I'm Rebecca Struzina, and this is The West London Witch, episode 72, Tales from the West London Witch Crypt, part 2. Chapter 1, Crime and Coincidence in California.
Bakersfield's current population is about 400,000. Population-wise, it ranks just below Tulsa, Oklahoma, and just above Wichita, Kansas. So it's not a metropolis, but it's not a podunk town either. Yet it has a small-town vibe, as you'll learn in this story. Last year, I covered a grisly murder case that occurred in 1993, a story about William Compton, an elderly cancer patient who was murdered, stabbed to death in his own home. He was stabbed dozens of times, so it was an awful scene. Compton's case went unsolved for several months, but detectives continued investigating until a prime suspect emerged. A man named Christopher Lightsey. Lightsey was a despicable human. By the time he'd become a suspect in Mr. Compton's homicide, Lightsey had numerous run-ins with law enforcement. As a matter of fact, by the time he popped up on detectives' radar, he was incarcerated for molesting minors. Christopher Lightsey was charged with and tried for Mr. Compton's murder. Lightsey's verbal outburst during his trial proved to be too much for the court to tolerate, so the judge ordered Lightsey to be muzzled during his trial. Eventually, a jury convicted Lightsey for the murder of Mr. Compton. All that occurred in the mid-90s, Mr. Compton's murder and Christopher Lightsey's criminal trial. After I covered that story last year, I was made aware that my niece knows the current resident of Mr. Compton's former home, the home he was murdered in. Before her family bought the house, it was disclosed that the former owner was murdered in the property. She and her family weren't deterred. They loved the house and went forward with the purchase. Before moving in, the new homeowners decided to have the house blessed, and their family's priest agreed to perform this blessing. The only details the homeowners disclosed to the priest about the home was that a death had occurred in the property. They didn't say how this death occurred. Right on schedule, the priest showed up, but when the homeowner answered the door, it was apparent the priest was uncomfortable. He stammered. You could tell he didn't know exactly how to ask the question, but he went forward. Was the prior resident murdered here, he asked. The new homeowner said yes, that's how he died. The priest stammered some more. He was familiar with the house. His brother, the priest's brother, was Christopher Lightsey, the man convicted of murdering the former owner.
Chapter 2. Sally wants to run the show.
I grew up fairly spiritual. I grew up Catholic, and I went to Catholic school as a kid. And there's this crazy story that my family always kind of told. So basically, if you have been raised Catholic, you know the classic story that priests generally do not get married. But my uncle was one of the very few priests in the US who got an exception. And so there's this weird loophole that you were able to get married as a Catholic priest if you were like of the certain denomination and you convert over. So he's like one of the I think it's like 22 priests in the world who is a Catholic priest. And so growing up like that, so he married my dad's sister, my aunt, and they had several kids. And he became the pastor of this church in New Jersey. And, growing up, being a Catholic priest with a full family, which is so unusual of an experience as it is. But something that our family always talked about was he was friends with the local parish exorcist. This was something that I never met this person, but we would hear about this guy. He was just an old family friend. He would come and get dinner with my aunt and uncle once a month and just, normal as can be dinner. And from my understanding of what an exorcist is, we've all seen the movies or maybe read the books or heard crazy stories. But the way that my family talks about exorcists is most parishes or dioceses has a person who will at least kind of investigate if something demonic or unusual, or quite often it's just someone with like a mental health challenge. And so, the church, if someone comes to the church, they'll investigate it and quite often just refer them to some sort of social services. But he's the guy that was his job. And so he would come for years and years to visit my aunt and uncle. And he sometimes would bring gifts for my cousins. And so my cousin, Monica, who's my age, so we're now in our 30s, but this is when we were just like little toddlers. We were just learning how to walk and talk. And she was given a gift by this exorcist, which was in the late 80s, early 90s, something called a Sally doll. And a Sally doll was basically one of those dolls. You would lie it on its back and its eyes would close and you would pick it up and the eyes would open. Like I had a Sally doll as a kid too. And so in any case, the exorcist came for dinner one night. He brought all the kids, all 5 of them, gifts. And for Monica, he brought a Sally doll. And the doll was definitely, even before we knew more about it, always unusual. Again, it's a Sally doll. You're supposed to lie it back and its eyes closed. And it's almost like I don't know if it's like a weight or gravity thing that it does that. But you would lie this doll on its back and its eyes would stay open, or you would pick it up and sometimes its eyes would just slowly blink shut. just kind of on its own time, which we were like, oh, maybe it's broken or something. And then the doll would also just kind of disappear around the house. It would be, in the crib with my cousin, and then suddenly just be in the kitchen or somewhere that was like out of reach of like a 4-year-old. It was just like a thing. And my aunt would, kind of scold the other kids, being like, stop taking her doll. Like, this is her doll. Like, let her be. And the kids would be like, we didn't. And she was like, I know you guys did. Like, just stop. And then, so I guess my cousin must have been probably like between the ages of like 2 and 3, like just learning how to talk. And her first full sentence was, Sally wants to run the show. That was her first full sentence she said as a little kid. And my aunt was very unsettled by that. Not even just like Sally, or I love my doll Sally. It was, yeah, Sally wants to run the show. And at one point, my aunt just got very uncomfortable with the doll. She was just like, there's something about it. She just felt uncomfortable. So she throws the doll away. She throws it into the trash. And the very next day she goes to wake Monica up and the doll is back in her bed. And she is furious. She thinks it's one of the other kids just playing this pet prank. And she, again, goes to talk to all of them. And she's like, guys, stop moving this doll. And they're like, we're not doing it. It's not us. And, at this point, Monica's seen her doll again. She loves this doll so much. My aunt feels bad for having thrown it away. And so this just goes on for weeks, like an exorbitantly long time, considering how she felt so uncomfortable with this doll pretty much from the start. After that, a few months go by and the exorcist comes back for dinner. And my aunt and uncle, almost as a joke, bring up like, that doll, like, you didn't get it from a case, did you? Like, it's just kind of, we're pulling our hair out at it. And they truly say it as like a joke. And he goes, oh, well, I should have told you all. It was a used doll. And as a matter of fact, I did get it from one of my cases. But don't worry, so it was from a house that I had to do an exorcism in. And the family had the experience was so horrendous for them. They just left the house. They left all the things in the house. And they were just going to sell it all, donate it all, just give it all away. And so they had told him, the house has been blessed. If you want to take some things from it, you're welcome to, because we're literally just going to throw it all away. And he was like, well, again, I've, sort of warded off whatever the thing was. And so he picked up the doll and a few other items to give to my cousins. And literally, so he's telling this story of being like, but don't worry, I blessed it. Like, it should be totally fine. And my uncle at the dinner table stands up, goes to my cousin's room, picks up the Sally doll, gets into his car and drives to the local dump and drops the doll off there. And that was the last time we ever saw the Sally doll, which we still joke about as an adult. If we see a kind of an unusual doll, we'll be like, Sally wants to run the show.
Chapter 3. The Woman in the Window.
So it takes place in Riverside, California, Southern California. I would spend summers down there at my uncle's home, my uncle and aunt, and with their 3 sons, my 3 cousins. And it was always a really nice place to stay because it was this enormous historic house. They always had tons of food. We were teenagers and even younger when we started staying down there in the summers. And they had a hot tub and the neighbors had a pool, and we played video games and we played board games just all day. And my cousin's friends would come over and it was just a fantastic time.
The house was an awesome place to gather, play, and enjoy the summer. However, as far back as Jay can remember, there were stories about the home that were a little bit unsettling.
My uncle, who was an obstetrician, he would, because of the nature of his work, he would keep really strange hours. He would come and go through the day, through the night. And he always had a story about how he had seen this woman in a ghostly form.
Early one morning, whilst preparing for work, Jay's uncle peered out his bedroom window and was taken aback as he saw something totally unexpected at the far back portion of the yard.
He said that while he was getting ready, he saw her up there just pacing back and forth. There's a tree back there as well. She was under this tree he said it was very early in the morning, maybe 5 o'clock in the morning, just kind of pacing, strolling back and forth under that tree and kind of going away from under the tree and then back. Just kind of being there. According to my uncle, she had died on that grassy area in the backyard. And I remember that being a very significant part of his story because that's where she had died and then that's where he saw her.
Jay was, of course, intrigued by this story, but he had never seen this lady. However, there were other things that occurred that made him think twice about the home and added validity to his uncle's tale.
And one of those is that they had a dog. Believe it or not, the dog's name was Kitty. And Kitty would run around upstairs because we always stayed in the basement. The basement was unique because it had this huge built-in bar, this whole dining space where we would lay out all of these board games we were playing. It just had everything we needed in order to have fun. So we would sleep down there as well. And at night, the house was unique in that every floor was hardwood and there was a large space between the ceiling of the floor beneath and the floor of the floor above. And so at night, we would hear Kitty running around upstairs and her nails, you could hear them on the hardwood floor. But the unique thing about that was that Kitty had died many years before. She was unfortunately hit by a car in the front yard, but we would still hear Kitty running around at night upstairs.
Now, this is not your average family home. Books have been written on this house as it has a dark and bizarre history.
It was built, I want to say 1912, and it was built by a gentleman who owned a very large fruit packing company. The house went through a number of owners, and one of those owners was during the 1920s, during Prohibition. And he was in the mob or a gangster of some sort, and he ran a speakeasy out of that house, as well as an illegal gambling operation down in the basement where we would always spend time. And a legend of his tenure in that house was that he put a lot of his money into precious metals, and he would hide them in the house. Now, the house is unique, again, because you could walk through between the walls of the house. There was this walk space, and so we'd go in there as kids and just play hide and seek, and it was something out of a movie. So we would always be looking for this treasure because the legend is that he hid all of these precious metals and was arrested, and the treasure was never found.
Like the real-life Goonies, Jay and his cousins treated this home as their playground, a magical yet spooky space of opportunity and adventure. You never knew what might be lurking around each corner.
Another thing is a woman had committed suicide in that home. And it was my uncle's belief that the woman he saw was this woman. So a lot of interesting stories that kind of made the house a little creepy to us. Like, we didn't like to go in the basement alone. So another thing too is that neighborhood is old enough where the homes are large and they're historic, but each two houses share the same driveway. And the garages are detached from the home and they're behind the home. And this is going to be important later in the story. And so every other house had a driveway going through, a very long driveway. And then behind the garage was this huge retaining wall behind all of the homes that went up to this higher space, like a grassy area. And that area was at the same elevation as the top story of the home. And that's where my uncle's experience was he was in his bathroom getting ready and looked out and saw her on that grassy area behind the garage in a very high elevated area. So this particular evening, I want to say summer of 94, because I was 14 years old. I was there with my brother, my two cousins, and my cousin's friends. So there were about 6 or 7 of us. It was about 9 at night, dark. The reason why that driveway is unique is my uncle's home, they had a spa outside the backyard, and their neighbors had a pool. And they had this agreement where they would just share each other's facilities. And so this evening, we were in the neighbor's pool on the other side of the driveway. We were playing, I remember very clearly, we were playing Marco Polo. We were in there for hours. And my cousin, out of nowhere, says, "There she is." And we all stopped and we looked at my cousin's window that faces the pool. And every light in that room was on. And there were many windows. And there's this woman looking down on us. As I'm looking at the windows in his bedroom, she's in the very far left window. Now, because all the lights in the room were on and they were behind her, we couldn't make out any features on the front of her. So she was this very clear, distinct silhouette. But we knew it was a woman because as she was looking down on us, we could see a bun in her hair. And she was wearing what looked like an older dress would have maybe some flare on the shoulders. You could see that was a part of her silhouette. So you could see she was wearing some kind of dress.
Standing there motionless in the pool, the kids looked up at the lady, who in turn looked down on them. This was not a fleeting moment. For 10 minutes, the two parties stood there staring at one another. The kids quietly spoke among themselves about what they were seeing, who this lady could be, and how chilling yet incredible this moment was. But now the question was, what do they do next?
So we ran to the back door, which were these really nice French doors that went into the kitchen. And my Aunt Joanne was in the kitchen. And now mind you, I'm 14, my brother's 16, my 2 cousins are 16 and 18, and their friends are 16 and 18. So we're very well aware of the world. So we run into the kitchen and we ask, "Aunt Joanne, were you in Mike's room at all?" She says, "No, I've been in the kitchen, just cooking, just whatever she was doing in the kitchen." We thought, "Oh, that's weird." So we run up to Mike's room all together, of course, because we're freaking out. We run into Mike's room and every stair creaks as you go up. We go into Mike's room and we look at the window that she was standing at. And all of the windows had this, I don't even know how to describe this, but it's one of those rods that comes out on either side and then comes together, and it has like curtains on it. So that was ripped off of the wall and it was bent in probably 15 or 20 different ways. And it was lying on the hardwood floor at the base of the window. And we were just freaked out. We were so scared. And it, at that point, it wasn't just something we saw, but it was something we could pick up and analyze. And it was just completely unexplainable.
Jay's aunt and uncle were completely at peace with the knowledge that they shared their home with this mysterious woman. It was as much her property as it was theirs. And even Jay admitted that as haunting as this experience was, it was not menacing. They didn't feel threatened or terrorized, but rather in awe of what they were witnessing. Jay told me that he would love to buy this property and move in with his own family. His children, however, are not quite as keen on that idea. That concludes today's collection of tales from the West London Witch Crypt. Chapter 1, Crime and Coincidence in California, came to us from Robert of the Notorious Bakersfield podcast, a fantastic show that shares stories about the most notorious crimes, events, and characters from my hometown, Bakersfield, California. Make sure to check out Notorious Bakersfield wherever you listen to podcasts. Chapter 2, Sally Wants to Run the Show, was told by Rosie who you may have recognized from episode 69, Not So Urban Legends. Chapter 3, The Woman in the Window, was told by Jay, who was roped into sharing his story by my mom. Good looking out there, Mom. Thank you to each of our storytellers for sharing your boo moments with us. It is an honor and a joy to bring these tales to life. Do you have a spooky story you'd like to share? I'd love to hear it. Drop me an email at thewestlondonwitch@gmail.com or find us on Instagram and Facebook at The West London Witch. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. And come and follow us for additional content on Instagram and Facebook. Until next time, merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again. The West London Witch is created by me, Rebecca Struzina. Our sound designer and production magician is the incredible Danny Cross. Our theme music was bespokely written and performed by the wickedly talented Kyle Hall. Our cover art is the beautiful collaboration between Lizzie Wilson and Jake Bowser. Special thanks to Miss Sinead Bowers, our quality control and biggest cheerleader. And thank you to you, all of our listeners all over the world. These are your stories. Thank you for sharing them with us.